G'day! Hi all, my name's Kim. I make this terrain here. Beautiful little houses, and I'd like to show you some tips and tricks for both assembling and painting them, so you can turn this into something like this. Yeah, as you can see, I've got fairly basic tools. A square file, a small square file for cleaning up the windows. In here, unlikely you'll need it, but a box cutter or craft knife, and basic paints. I use either Chromacryl or Reeves. These are student acrylic paints and available from most craft or hobby stores. Much less expensive for painting terrain and models than, say, Valero or Games Workshop, which you use on your actual figures, but I find these better, and because you're using a lot of them, they're much cheaper. Okay, we'll get to the cleanup and preparation stage for all of these models. Okay, cheers. Okay, before we start painting, the main thing that you'll need to do is to clean up around the windows. There's not much other flash that comes with this mold, so yeah, it's really just clean up around the windows that needs to be done before you prime and begin painting. So I use a square file, just a square needle file. You can get these from your average hardware store. Here in New Zealand, these were about $8 for a selection of 10 files, and yeah, one of them is the square file that I'm using here. Okay, so as you can see in here, there's a film that comes with the casting. It's just to do with the layout of the mold. All of the windows will get us some or a little bit of or a total film of hydrocal across the windows, so that needs to be cleaned up. So it's really quite simple. The hydrocal's pleasantly brittle but reasonably strong, so just a little bit of pressure will remove the film, and then just use the square file to just clean up any flash around the windows. It doesn't take too long to do these. So there we go. It's all nicely cleaned up and ready for painting that one. And so I'll just carry on and do the rest on this this level. There we go. You don't have to be too gentle around the window frames, but it does. You do need to be a little bit careful. The hydrocal is much stronger than plaster, but still it will break if you put significant pressure on the window frames. But yeah, basically pretty darn easy to clean up these windows. As you can see, I've only got one or two left to do. And we haven't broken a window frame yet. They almost clean themselves up. You really mainly just pushing out the film of hydrocal, and the file just drifts through nicely. Okay, cool. Well, so that's the only flash that you'll really find on these models, which is good. And yeah, this part is ready for priming. Okay, so I've made up a pretty loose liquid mix of paint here. I've used a small amount of white house primer as the base, and then coloured it with significant amounts of Reeves raw umber and burnt umber. Now, predominantly I've used the raw umber to make this colour, as you can see, but the burnt umber has been added just to give it a bit more redness, and this works as a great undercoat for brickwork. Looks nice and natural. Okay, for priming or base coating a model, there's nothing really flash or complicated about it. It's really just about covering the model as much as you can. In this case, I will advise that you try not to base coat the window frames. If you can, try and paint around them like I'm doing here. You'll find that it's much quicker to just touch up around a white window frame than it is to try and paint the window frame white. Yeah, so you'll save yourself a lot of time if you can just carefully paint around the windows like so. As you can see, the paint that I'm using here is pretty watery, but the pigment level in the Reeves paints is pretty strong, so it's even though it's running on pretty easily, it's covering really well. Now, I actually take this to a more extreme level. Well, not really more extreme, but I do have a spray brush, and so what I've got here is some plugs that I place inside the windows, and these, you could make a plug out of, you know, a piece of double-sided tape or just anything to make sure that those window frames stay white when you're base coating. So these plugs just sit in the window frames and just spray the same paint that I'm using here onto the model, and yeah, it's pretty good results. As you can see, these window frames here are just naked, had the plug sitting in the hole. This one actually I tried to see how an ink would work, but I had to paint over it, so that's a little bit different. But as you can see, the inside of this from the inside of this building, I've actually used the spray brush to paint the base coat on the model. So anyway, yeah, nothing more simple, nothing more complicated than just get your model as covered as you can, trying to avoid the windows to save yourself a bit of time. Yeah, go for it. Get it, make it dark brown. Okay, as you can see, I've gone around and I've painted around all of the window frames just with the smaller brush, and now I'm going to go over the rest of the brickwork with a larger brush just to get it done nice and quick. Just while I'm talking about it, I will suggest that when you paint these models, you don't use enamel spray paint. It might sound quick and easy, but most of the enamel spray paints have a bit of an oily surface, and they don't make it easy for your general acrylic paints to stick to it. So you'll actually make it more difficult to paint if you use an enamel spray paint to base coat your model with. So yeah, basically avoid enamel paints when you're working with hydrocal. The other reason is these acrylic paints have got quite a bit of elasticity, and so they actually provide quite a bit of chip protection just by the cushioning effect that they have on the models. Yeah, they as you can see, that it also soaks in well to the slightly porous surface of the hydrocal, and yeah, also helps. It bonds better than say an enamel paint would. Now, when you're painting them, also remember to paint all of the base of the model and all of the upper surfaces where the floors are going to sit together. The reason for this is, again, it provides a bit of cushioning effect, and will stop the white powdery mold finish or any chipping happening around the point where the floors contact each other. So yeah, it's the acrylic paint has quite an important part to play in protecting your model and making it look good. Okay, for the dry brushing phase I'm going to use KWEL's Red Oxide. It's a nice brick red colour, as you can see from the top. This is a well used tube, and I've basically got very little left, so hopefully we'll have enough to complete this floor of the building. Okay, you don't actually need a huge amount when you're dry brushing your brick red onto a building like this. Just always remember that less is more in this sort of situation. So I'm going to try and get this a little bit dry on the dry brush, and I'm using a pig bristle brush. This one's a nice old one, and it's got nice stiff short bristles and has served me well. So sometimes older is better, and worn in happens just before an item's worn out. As you can see, there's not much left of this brush. Anyway, so it's a nice stiff brush. I've got a very small amount of paint on here, and I'm just going to start brushing that on, just hitting the tops, not trying to scrub it in to the crevices. Really just wanting to get the tops of those bricks so that we've got the we sort of bring out the brick texture, and it's quite a nice brick texture, although it's actually really a stone texture. If you closely look at this, the bricks are quite irregular in places, and one day in the future I'll probably go about and make some more bricky looking bricks, but at tabletop distance you don't really notice. If I was going to do a stone building, which I can do and have done with these, it's really just a matter of changing the base colour to a slightly lighter brown, remembering that most stone is actually brown, not grey, and working up to a light sort of browny, tanny colour for the dry brush. With most acrylic paints, especially these KWEL and Reeves student acrylics, they actually dry darker than what they appear when you first put them on the model. And the pigments are slightly thin on some of the paints. So this red oxide is, if you note, that's fresh, just put on paint, and it's quite bright red. And this is the corner of the side of the building I painted earlier, and it's quite a bit darker. Yeah, so to get that brightened up a bit, I'm just going to do a second coat of dry brushing, and again just picking up the brushing it on lightly, picking up the tops of the detail. And also the other thing is, you notice that I'm brushing down. I'm only hitting the building on the downward stroke. Remember that when you've got this building on the table, the light should be falling from the top, and so when you're putting light coloured paint on, remember to brush down in this sort of situation so the colour ends up on the tops of the brick. Okay, for the corner stonework I'm using Reeves sand mixed with KWEL's black, and I'm doing about a 50-50 mix. And again, remember that your paint is going to dry slightly darker than what it appears when it's first put on the model. So I'm going to aim for a colour that is slightly lighter than what I want, as I'm trying to match this floor, which you'll notice that I've accidentally broken out the window frame here when I was testing the plugs for the spraying. So yeah, I'm doing a replacement floor for the building. So right, I've got I've got my colour, and I think probably touch more black and we'll be good to go. And again, I'm just using a small pig bristle brush, nothing fancy. This is the sort of thing that they give you for high school art, and in my opinion you really don't need the flashiest brushes to paint terrain. Quite often the final steps of dry brushing a light dusting of colour like sand over the model is going to tie everything together anyway, and quite often you won't notice the small mistakes that you've made, even if you go over the lines a bit. The sort of colour modulation that the dry brushing provides really sort of covers up most of the mistakes and ills that you might have seen when you were painting your model. Okay, so the final steps is usually dry brushing, and in this step we're really only just adding a highlight to the very upper surfaces of things, and we're just trying to brighten and lift, and also to tie everything together, as I mentioned earlier. So for this step I use this brush here, which has got stiff but very fine bristles. This helps to give a real powdery dry brush to the model. The stiffness means that it usually just hits the tops of the detail rather than getting into the corners and that. So yeah, basically I'm only putting the very tiniest amount of paint on the brush, and I'm trying to get it coating most of the bristles very, very lightly, so I'm dabbing it on the palette to get that to happen. Okay, so I start by just lightly dry brushing, and remember that less is more. I'm really just touching the model very lightly, and again I'm stroking down so that the paint falls on the tops and helps to accentuate the lighting effects that you would see when you're working naturally, well, when you're looking at a model naturally, or the real thing. Okay, and remember that again the paint's going to dry slightly darker, so you can get away with slightly more than you think. Yeah, so I'm just going to finish off here, just getting all those nice little details. Don't worry too much if you get some light spots and darker spots. No lighting in the real world's perfect, and yeah, the lighting effects that you're trying to create here are likewise not perfect. Okay, so that's left us with some nice nice effects there. However, you can do slightly more. You can add some ink work to sort of give a bit more life to the model. So I'll just show you how I do that, and how I think that sort of brings life. Okay, so my ink work I usually for buildings and such is usually just using watered down acrylic paint, just like we've been using on the model. But as you can see, I'm aiming for a almost translucent thickness to the paint, so I don't want it too dark and I don't want it too light. And when you put it on the model, you'll see whether you need to add more water, and sometimes you can just add more water to what you've put on. But yeah, what I'm trying to achieve here with the black is to sort of create some water streaks. Dirt and grime on real buildings sort of builds up, and we're just going to try and replicate some of that effect here. And we can also sort of add in some shadow work as well around the corner bricks. And again, if you don't like where you've added the ink, quite often just rub it with your finger or the watered down paint. It's not really ink, and you'll be able to get most of that off the tops where you might not want it. Okay, so I'm going to add a few more water streaks. This sort of just brings a bit of life and a bit of realism to your model. Just sort of pick places where you think that water might naturally run down. Just sort of helps to modulate the detail effects, and especially on the corner bricks where we've only really got one colour at the moment prior to the dry brushing, it adds a bit more depth to the brickwork there. Okay, that's probably enough of the black. Now, moss and lichen appears on a good proportion of brick buildings at some stage, and so I just use the same process with green paint, a dark green paint, to create the mossy effect. So we'll just add a few patches of green and a few green streaks. We can also add the green to the black streaks we already have, because those places are going to be areas where, where there's water, there's usually lichen. And so again, this is just really to add a bit of life and depth, a bit of character to your building. It's not necessary, as you saw the previous dry brush. That sort of quite happily accentuated the brickwork, but this, I feel, just adds that extra depth of realism and lifelikeness to a building. Okay, so once we've inked our building, we're going to have to let it dry. So that's what it will look like when it's all dried. The inks will, or the paint, watered down paint, will sort of become a little more transparent as it dries. So again, when you're doing the inking step, don't worry about being a little bit heavy-handed, because it will tone itself down. Okay, so again, I'm just going to add a dusty dry brush to tie everything together. So this side of the building hasn't yet been dry brushed, so we'll add that dry brush now. And again, just trying to hit the tops of the bricks, very gentle, starting with less and building it up as. Okay, we're getting there. Rightio. Right, so let's compare that to just a plain dry brush. As you can see, there's less life in the just basic dry brush. It still looks good, but yeah, when you compare it to this has a much more natural feel, and yeah, I really like it. And so, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much enough to call this building, well, this level of the building complete. Once everything's to this level, that's really as much as you need. And yeah, they'll look great on your tabletop and be the envy of all your friends. Okay, thanks for watching.